On a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, nearly 1,000 stone giants stand frozen in time, their faces turned toward the sea. They are called Moai, and for centuries, no one could explain who carved them, why they were built, or how they were moved across impossible terrain. Tonight, we walk among the stone sentinels of Easter Island and uncover the lost civilization that shaped them. The island itself is barely more than a speck in the vast Pacific, only 63 square miles of volcanic rock and sparse vegetation. Yet here, the Polynesian people created one of history's most enigmatic monuments to human ambition. Over 800 years, they carved nearly 1,000 moai, some weighing as much as 80 tons. Every god, every ancestor, every figure carved into stone tells us a story of obsession, belief, and catastrophe. The first moai were carved around the year 1200. They were smaller then, no more than 12 feet tall, and served as markers for ancestors and honored dead. The Rapa Nui people, who had sailed across impossible distances to reach this island, needed to connect themselves to the land, to stake their claim to eternity. They began carving portraits in volcanic stone called tuff, faces that would watch over their descendants forever. But ambition grew with each generation. The moai became taller, more elaborate, their features more exaggerated. By 1500, sculptors were carving figures 30 feet high, with long, narrow faces, pointed chins, and eyes that seemed to pierce through stone itself. Each figure demanded more labor, more obsession, more sacrifice from a population that was growing increasingly desperate for resources. At the Rano Raraku quarry on the island's eastern slope, the stone was soft enough to carve with basalt picks and obsidian blades. Sculptors would work in teams, chiseling away at the tough face by face, creating features that mimicked the high chiefs and ancestors they revered. The work was never finished. Abandoned moai still lie in the quarry, half-carved, their eyes incomplete, their bodies still bound to the volcanic rock that birthed them. The eyes were added last, always coral for the whites, with pupils of dark obsidian or basalt. Until the eyes were placed, the moai was believed to be spiritually incomplete, lifeless. The moment those eyes were set into the skull, the moai was believed to mana, to possess divine power and life force. A figure without eyes was just a stone. With eyes, it became a god, an ancestor, a presence that could see and judge and bless. Moving the moai from the quarry to their final positions on Ahu, ceremonial platforms along the coast, remains one of history's great unsolved engineering mysteries. Some weighed 80 tons. The nearest tree was miles away. Yet somehow, across broken volcanic terrain, over centuries, nearly 1,000 of these giants were transported and erected, many standing upright on elevated platforms to oversee the ocean. Theories abound. Wooden sledges pulled by ropes, or perhaps the moai were walked by teams rocking them side to side, the massive stones inching forward like the movements of a sleeping god. Some archaeologists believe the figures were transported on wooden rails. Others suggest simple human ingenuity and patience that we can barely comprehend today. The method may never be known. The moai themselves kept the secret. Ko T. Rickus was one of the few moai ever restored with eyes returned to their sockets. When tourists first saw the figure with its coral and obsidian gaze restored, many reported a profound chill, as if the statue had suddenly awakened, suddenly become a god watching them instead of the other way around. The power of those eyes to transform inert stone into presence was undeniable, ancient, and still palpable centuries later. Ahu Tongariki was once the largest ceremonial platform on Easter Island, displaying 15 moai in a row, their eyes facing inland toward the living, blessing the settlements behind them. Then, in May of 1760, a tsunami hit the island and toppled every single figure, scattering them across the ground like fallen giants. For over 200 years they lay broken and scattered, their power seemingly shattered forever, their blessing withdrawn. But the moai were not gods of creation or cosmic forces. They were representations of the ancestors, the tupuna, who had passed into the spiritual realm. Each one bore the features of a particular respected ancestor or high chief, their faces individualized enough that islanders could recognize them. To carve a moai was not sacrilege. It was to grant your ancestor eternal presence, to say their name would never be forgotten, that their eyes would never close. The Rapa Nui people were skilled navigators and fishermen, having sailed across the Pacific in double-hulled canoes from Polynesia, finding this tiny island through stars and ocean swells. They brought with them pigs, chickens, and the seeds of taro and sweet potato. The island had no trees when they arrived, or perhaps there were palms that they felled for agriculture and canoe building. The resource constraints became increasingly severe. By the year 1400, the island's forests had been completely stripped. The great palms that had provided wood for canoes, tools, and rollers for moving the moai were gone forever. The population had grown to perhaps 15,000 souls, competing for shrinking resources. The carving continued obsessively, even as the island's carrying capacity collapsed. The moai became not symbols of unity, but symbols of a civilization cannibalizing itself. Conflict erupted. Different clans and different chiefs began toppling each other's moai, deliberately breaking them at the neck, their severed heads falling to the ground in acts of desecration meant to destroy an ancestor's mana, their spiritual power. The toppling of a moai was war waged through stone, a violation so profound that it broke not just monuments but the spiritual fabric of the society that built them. By 1650, nearly all of the standing moai had been deliberately toppled by rival clans. Only a handful remained upright, those protected by their position or the power of the chiefs who guarded them. The age of moai construction had ended not with a whimper but with systematic, ritualized destruction. The island had been brought to the brink of collapse by the very ambition that once unified it. Then came the slavers. In the 1860s, Peruvian ships arrived at Easter Island and abducted over 1,000 islanders, more than one-third of the remaining population, to work in guano mines. Most never returned. The knowledge of how to carve the moai, the meaning of their eyes, the songs and stories tied to each ancestor's face, much of it died with those who were taken, lost to the Pacific, lost to cruelty, lost forever. The few islanders who survived returned with diseases and stories of the outside world. The Rapa Nui culture, already fractured, entered a period of profound trauma and transformation. The moai were no longer central to survival. They became relics of a lost age, silent witnesses to a civilization's fall. But the statues remained standing, or lying, a permanent record of humanity's capacity for both extraordinary creation and equally extraordinary self-destruction. Some moai bore the image of the Birdman, a figure unique to Easter Island mythology, depicting a human-bird hybrid that represented a competition among chiefs to capture the egg of the sooty tern. The Birdman cult replaced ancestor veneration and may have been a response to resource scarcity, reducing the need for constant monument building. It was a shift from building gods to playing God, choosing human champions rather than carving stone ancestors. Punapau was another carving site on the island's western side, where sculptors created topknots, or pukao, that were fitted onto the heads of the largest moai. These volcanic stone crowns, some weighing 10 tons, added another element of monumentality and prestige. A moai with a topknot was claimed by a particularly powerful clan, their status carved in stone and displayed to all who could see it. The topknots themselves became symbols of authority and divine favor. The largest moai ever erected stood over 32 feet tall and weighed 82 tons. Named Paro, it was restored and re-erected as an act of modern archaeology and respect. When its eyes, made of white coral and black obsidian, were finally returned to their sockets in 1978, observers reported that same uncanny sensation. A stone god, dormant for centuries, suddenly awakened and watching. The restoration work took 40 years and countless hands, honoring a monument built by the very means it seemed to require. Ahu Akivi stands inland rather than on the coast, an unusual placement that suggests it served a different ceremonial purpose. Its 7 moai face toward the ocean rather than toward the settlements, a reversal of typical Ahu orientation. They were built around 1300 and may represent the founder ancestors who guided the first canoes to the island. Their gaze reaching out to the ocean emphasizes not dominion over the land, but connection to the sea from which their people came. The Moai themselves seem to reflect the changing ideals of Rapa Nui society. The earliest carvings were relatively simple and naturalistic. Over time, they became more stylized, with exaggerated features, longer noses, more prominent chins, broader shoulders. The final generation of Moai were increasingly abstract, less lifelike, as if the sculptors were reaching toward something symbolic rather than representative, something spiritual rather than merely ancestral. The Moai were carved almost exclusively by male sculptors, and the skill was often passed down through families and clans. Certain lineages held the prestige and knowledge of Moai carving as a closely guarded secret. To be a Moai carver was to hold power, not political power, but spiritual and social prestige, that elevated both the sculptor and the chief who could afford to commission their work. When the tradition ended, that knowledge was nearly lost entirely. Modern restoration efforts have brought dozens of Moai back to standing position, their eyes replaced with historically accurate coral and obsidian. These restorations are not archaeological forgeries. They are acts of respect and recognition, returning the statues to the spiritual presence they were meant to embody. Yet each restoration raises a question. Are we honoring the past or inventing it? Are these truly the ancestors returned, or simply stone with our modern meanings imposed upon them? The DNA of ancient Polynesians has been found in isolated populations across the Pacific, proof that the voyaging and settlement continued, that Easter Island was never truly isolated. Yet somehow, the civilization there developed in near-total separation from the wider Polynesian world, creating a unique culture, unique mythology, and the world's most distinctive monumental art. That isolation, combined with resource scarcity, created both the obsession with Moai and the conditions that destroyed it. The mystery of the Moai remains partly unsolved. Not in their stone forms, we can see those clearly, but in the questions they ask. How does a society become so fixated on a single form of expression that it forgets survival? How does monumentality become pathology? The Moai are not just sculptures. They are a cautionary tale carved in stone, a warning about the dangers of obsession written in volcanic rock and unfulfilled ambition. 37 Moai remain fully intact and on their original platforms, a tiny fraction of the original 800 or more. Most are scattered, broken, or only partially restored. Yet even in their damaged state, they exert a profound pull on visitors. To stand before a Moai is to feel the weight of intention, the presence of a culture that poured generations of labor into these stone faces, believing that doing so would preserve their ancestors forever. The eyes of the Moai, when restored, create an uncanny presence, something between the ancient world and the modern. Observers report feeling watched, judged, or blessed. Whether that sensation is psychological or spiritual is unknowable, but the effect is consistent. The moment coral and obsidian are set into stone, something shifts. The statue becomes a presence. The ancestor awakens. The god is no longer asleep in the stone. It is conscious, aware, eternal. But the most striking fact about the Moai is not that they were built. It is that they were left behind. When the society collapsed, when conflict and starvation overtook the island, when the toppling of statues became an act of ritual warfare, the new generation did not destroy the stone itself. They left it behind as testimony, as evidence, as a statement that this ambition had once lived here, had once shaped a civilization, had once driven humans to monumental creation. Which Moai was the most powerful? Which held the mana of the strongest ancestor? The answer lies not in a single statue, but in all of them together. A civilization frozen in stone, watching over an island where no one remembers their names. Tell us which Moai haunts you most, and subscribe to walk the next hall of ancient monuments with gods in stone, where every sculpture holds a secret the stone refuses to surrender.